Fascinating insight. Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you for listening. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Let me introduce to you the very esteemed panel I have here. I'll start to my right with Paddy Dominguez. Paddy has worked and represented athletes and coaches across many sports, including football, rugby union, Olympic sports, tennis, and motorsports. He's also consulted and advised many of the world's most renowned clubs, organizations, and governing bodies, including FIFA, where he sits on the Committee for the New Agent Regulations. Next to him is Jerome Meary. Is that the right pronunciation for the last name? Sorry, my French is super rusty. 5 years, but don't remember anything. Very good. Very good. Jerome is a French football intermediary, founder of the Elite Athletes Talent Agency. He's also involved in football operations in Europe and particularly in the US with MLS. He's also founder of FFF USA. What is that? Okay. In the past, he worked for many years for the MLS in player department. He's also a football consultant for Eurosport. And at the end of the panel, we have Matthieu. He's French and Colombian, dual citizen. He co-founded the Alinea agency, which currently represents many clients from South America, and his star client is David Ospina. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being here. I guess the first question that perhaps people are most interested in is, we like to think of football as a globalized sport. Everyone understands the game, everyone watches the whole game, but there's still massive differences, aren't there? So what would you say is the biggest difference from doing a deal in Europe to, let's say, doing a deal in South America or North America? Start with you, Paddy.
Thanks. I would say very, very clearly the money. Europe is obviously the global buying market. It's the largest purchasing power. It's where the vast majority of money is held. So clearly money is a huge driver. The other markets generally, effectively to this day and age, are export markets for the European market. They will grow eventually, bit by bit. They're improving. You see that every year. But in general terms, they are effectively export markets. The MLS is growing very, very quickly. I think further down the line, the MLS will at some point be on par with Europe eventually. There's markets in China, India, which will start to grow quite quickly now as well. But fundamentally, they're all export markets to the European market, which is where all the money is effectively held. And until that sort of starts to grow outside of the European markets, they will continue to be export markets. That's the biggest difference, in my opinion, anyway.
What do you think, Jerome?
I think MLS is a very different market than Europe. It's a private league. It's not officially regulated by FIFA, so it has its own rules, which makes it very different to approach when you go sign a player to MLS. You have to agree with the club, but you also have to agree with the league because it's a private league. So you need 3 agreements: club, league, agent, and players. So it's very different. You get paid by the league. The commission system is included in the salary cap of every team. I can go in details if you want, but it's definitely different, and it's a market that is growing a lot, and we people who want to get to this market have to study and understand it before trying to contact the teams and everything. Otherwise, the Americans will close the doors.
So, am I right in saying there's a lot of bureaucracy involved in this process? A lot of bureaucracy involved?
Yes and no. The fact that it's regulated by the league makes it easy for a lot of things. It's smooth the system for commissions, for example. It's very regulated. Everybody is getting paid by the league. The players are getting paid by the league. And on the contrary, for other things, it can get more bureaucratic. So it really depends on which aspect.
The same question for you. What's the biggest difference between Europe and the rest of the world, as far as the rest of the football world, as far as doing a deal is concerned?
Well, as an agent, there is a huge challenge being a South American agent because, as you're all aware of, all the players in the world want to play in Europe, and all the clubs, depending on the country, have a certain amount of foreign players they can hire or can transfer in. And of course, most of the South American players are not, don't have European passports, so our market is a lot limited. It's very limited to come into European clubs. So there's a second market, which is MLS starting to grow, but they still, I'm not sure they still understand how the transfer in and out works. They have their special way of dealing with agents and clubs abroad, but Jerome will be able to talk a bit, to talk more about it. But and especially the MLS is not the. Let's say that for a Colombian player, you try to go to Europe, and then if you can't make it for any reason, you usually go to either Argentina, Brazil, or Mexico, which actually nobody talks about Mexico. Mexico is a huge, powerful financially market for South American players, and now you have European players going there, especially French ones. I mean, the big star in Mexico is a French striker, Gignac. So that's one thing, and the main difficulty you'll see that third-party ownership, as we heard in the morning, was forbidden, and then players can own their own rights and blah blah blah. But in South America, it never disappeared. So in all the contracts, you have economical rights and federative rights, as we mention it, and so you can end up having 7 agents, as Erkut said. But in South America, you can end up having 22 agents, 45 clubs talking about the same player. So it's a bit tricky. And if you want to talk about something forbidden, third-party ownership, so let's say a player is 100%, so you can end up selling 145% of a player. It's all these situations you need to deal with.
How can you sell 145% of the same player?
Well, you have 45 clubs, agents, or guys coming in, and they all think they have a piece, and they have official document and say, I have 20%, and blah, 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 and you add on everything, and you have 145%. So someone in the middle, made his way.
I just bounce on that because, for example, TPO is obviously forbidden in the US. If we talk about players owned by TPO, then we just forget about it in MLS. The league office says stops. At the same time, we don't have the right to pay solidarity fees and formation fees or youth development fees. So it makes it tricky as well because the law in the US governs that aspect, and basically we cannot do that. So when you do a transfer between, for example, a French club and a US club, then the US club cannot pay the solidarity fees, like the 5%, and so it makes it complicated, and you need a system to pay the French club, so the French club can actually pay the solidarity fee. So it makes it a little bit complicated. That's an example of some admin stuff, like more complicated.
Yeah. So I mean, if I summarize all your 3 answers, you're basically saying that we have a problem on the demand side because there are a lot of great players, especially outside Europe, but there is limited money inside those markets, and there's then a limited demand to get these guys in because of legal restriction of the amount of foreigners. So you basically then have to do 2 jobs at the same time, don't you? You have to manage your client, but also manage the possible destination where he goes to. How does that then add up in terms of your workload, and what takes precedent? Start with you, Paddy.
That's just, I think, firstly, depending on the market that you operate in, that comes back to just some of the fundamentals of agency work, which is a clear plan. It's knowing what markets your player can play in. It's understanding those markets. It comes back to some of the themes we touched on earlier. It's research. Mostly it's down to networking, having good partners on the ground in the destinations that you feel are most appropriate for your client. There's a lot of factors involved in planning for a player to export them to Europe. So it's really just planning, research, networking, time, experience. There's a lot that goes in. European agents based here that solely deal in and around Europe, they don't have those kinds, they don't need to plan to that particular level or that degree. And often then in markets such as the MLS, Australia, South America, wherever players may go towards the end of their career, you don't really need to plan so heavily for a guy at 34, 35 at that particular stage. So planning research, it's multifaceted when you're planning for an exporting a player to Europe. Not every market in Europe will be appropriate for your player. Most people will aim for England, but of course with work permits, etc., and passports, it's very, very limited. So naturally, you have a lot of traffic going to the markets whereby there's not those restrictions on the players, but then your player is one of a very, very large number of players trying to get into. There's only limited space in every market. So it's just careful planning, setting out a roadmap for your player and his future.
And how do you get your players to be seen by potential clubs?
You know, again, that comes down to contacts, networking, obviously gathering footage. Ideally, from an export market, you want to be targeting players who are national team players, and therefore it's far easier to see a player playing in an international tournament. Local league players, so in Australia, in the A-League, etc., there isn't a plethora of scouts from Europe that are going to go on a plane for 30 hours to Australia to watch a player. So simple as that, you have to present that player all the time. It's footage, it's contacts, it's experience, it's networking. That's how you get a player seen.
Jerome, you touched upon this already, but when it comes to exporting a player, what are the different things that you need to look out for to make this happen?
It's interesting because we're not an exporting league. MLS is not an exporting league. They want to become. So the strategy of recruitment, or of recruiting players, has changed a lot within the last 5 years. We were getting old players, players at the end of their career. We were getting big names. And I was putting MLS on the map of the world. So everybody knows MLS. But now that all I'd say the business side is set up, the stadiums are built, now they want to recruit younger. And now we're starting to sell players. We just sold Almiron to Newcastle, Alphonso Davies to Bayern Munich for more than 15, 20 million pounds. So the strategy has changed, and now all the owners of Major League Soccer are recruiting younger players under 25 years old. And we're ready to pay like 10 to 20 million transfer fees right now to get young players. So it's changing a lot. Obviously we have a lot of demand for European players. Colombia is a fantastic market for MLS. We actually work with Matthieu a lot on Colombian players to come to MLS. South American, but European as well. There's a lot of demand because there's not enough good American players, and there's a lot of teams coming in the league. So it's good to import players. We're starting to export, and for that, for example, I'm bringing a lot of French League One team in the US to understand this market, to watch players, and we're going to have a lot more offers from Europe, from League One, from Spain, for MLS players. But we need to get this market known by other clubs in Europe in order to export more.
And for those who perhaps are not as en fait with the specifics of MLS, is it the league effectively that's buying and selling the player? I mean, are you working on behalf of the league when, let's say, you're working on an Alphonso Davies deal?
That's a very good question. So basically, the league is the 24 owners. The board of the league is the 24 owners of the teams. Okay, so this board created the league office. We call it the league office, regulating everything. So when one owner wants to sell a player, or actually wants to buy a player, the decision has to be agreed by the 23 other owners. Because in MLS, you're competing on the field, but you are partners of the field. So all the decisions in terms of business and big money investment have to be made by the whole board and by the league. So when I say the teams want to sell, it's actually, MLS. The new strategy is MLS, and it's not one team wanting to sell. It's like the whole strategy is now we're going to become an exporting country. We developed all the youth academies. We're going to start developing young American players that we're going to sell in Europe.
Matthieu, let's say you have a very interesting Colombian goalkeeper and you want to have him play for a North London team. How do you make that happen?
Well, he was in France before, so basically the long story short, which was quite interesting, is because one of the thing when you're a South American agent, you need to work a lot with the clubs because South America is quite far away from Europe at the end, even though it's we have planes and video and footage and easily, but you need to be in regular contact with all the clubs all the time to feed them with information, even though they come all the time to South America. And of course, when the players you represent is already playing in Europe, well, it's easier. So when you can be just in a tournament and say, look, you're looking for a goalkeeper? Yeah, we need a goalkeeper who's going to handle pressure. So do you have a name for us? Say, yeah, well, I have one. He's playing in Nice, a small team in France, but you can see him at the World Cup in Brazil. So he's going to play in Brazil, World Cup, a lot of pressure. So you'll be able to see if he can handle pressure or not. And they made quarterfinals, and he made quite a good impression during the World Cup. So it was actually one of the nice moments when you have Arsene Wenger and his personal scouts after every game, watching the game, and after every game, having dinner with you and talking about the game, about your player. So it's sometimes you work a lot for some you want to live about your job, but you want to grow, you want to everything. But these kind of moments where you only talk about football and projects, and it's very nice. So that was a particular case. It was a good moment.
And how difficult is it sometimes to take a player outside of his own environment, especially when they come from a different culture and a different climate, and put them into, today is a nice weather, but London can look differently, into a very different kind of space. Is there a danger that their confidence gets lost, or that they feel a little bit homesick? I mean, how much can you do as an agent, and how important is that side of your work?
Well, part of the job starts before traveling, a long time before traveling, because when you accompany a player, it's not only about finding a good deal for boots or for contracts or finding a club for him. It's also try to help the parents when he has parents, because a lot of times, especially in Colombia, it's orphans or people coming from neighborhoods where they have the parents in jail or parents who are just victims of a civil war or whatever. So you have a lot of emotional, psychological, and you aspects on your work with the kids. And that's why we work a lot with schools and academical people who can accompany them with at schools, at universities, in case they don't make it football, because they can either make it to football, and then the most talented go abroad, but you need to have them ready before traveling, and the other ones, we try to get them prepared for professional life without being a footballer. So when they travel, we try to have them at least, have some knowledge of language and be in touch with some international aspects of what their profession is going to be. But of course, there is always the homesick issue, and then there's matter of personality. So I have the first player I brought to Europe, who was a player I brought to France, he was 24, 25, playing Colombian national team. We signed the contract in Paris. Well, it was in Paris. It wasn't for Paris Saint-Germain, but and after we went back for a restaurant, the two of us, and he said, well, if I spend 1,000 euros a month, I can live with that contract for 20 years in Colombia. I'm like, okay, so you feel like you achieved your goal already just signing the contract. And 6 months later, he was back to Colombia. I had another player I brought in to Europe a few years ago. He was 19. He was living with his parents before he came to Europe. First time he was out of the country for living, and every night he was calling me at the hotel, crying at 1 a.m., 2 a.m. So it was a typical call, hey Matt, are you asleep? Like, well, not anymore, but all right, I'll go to you. And I was like, why are you crying so much? He was looking at a picture of his parents. He was like, I'm crying because I know I'm not going back to Colombia until I'm 35. So the personality, he was aiming at something, and he managed to play at Arsenal afterwards, some point, now in Italy. And he's going to be 30 and so, and he's still going to play 4 or 5 more years in Europe before going back to MLS.
Yeah, I want to ask you the same question, Jerome. What are the difficulties for the player to adapt, and how can you help as an agent to make that adaptation process more effective and more pleasant?
So again, I'll talk about the other way, how a player can adapt to the US and to Major League Soccer. I think adapting to the life in the US is very easy. As I said, all the business and the clubs are very well set up, probably even better than Europe now. So the life of the players outside of football is pretty easy. Everybody is intrigued by the US. Everybody kind of want to live in the US. There's this American dream thing. So that works easy. Now, it's a lot more complicated on the field, because soccer is a new sport in the US. The soccer culture, the soccer IQ is not there for all of the players, all of the coaches, all of the staff. So they can have a hard time to adapt. For example, I have the example of Benoît Chéroux. He was the captain of Marseille, very close to the French national team. I signed him to Toronto, and he was telling me that he's very high soccer IQ. He was telling me that it was very hard for him to play, because he was giving the pass, he was doing this move, and then it was never getting the ball back. So it took him like 2 to 3 months to adapt to this way of playing. And it happens to most of the players. And actually, you can have a top talented player coming to MLS. If he doesn't have the will to adapt to this soccer culture on the field, he's not going to make it. We sign top players, like huge players from Europe or South America, coming to the US, not wanting to do the effort to adapt and to understand, and telling the coach, hey, no, that's this way is not the good way, my way is the best one. They never made it, and out. Americans, they don't care. You can be the biggest name ever. If you don't adapt to their way, then it's over. So that's more on the field.
I have a story like that with. It's not only MLS. There was a Colombian striker who went to Bayern Munich, and he was actually scoring goals on the first season, but he was.
El Tren.
I'm sorry.
Adolfo Valencia.
Yeah, and it was impossible for him to learn German. Well, it's a tricky language, but still, I didn't want to go to class. And at some point, someone at the club, I think it was the vice president, told him, "Look, Adolfo, we need you. Well, we need you to speak German, because I mean, we're Bayern Munich. You need to adapt. You need to adapt to the club. You need to adapt to the country." And the guy said, "Look, you hired me to learn German or to score goals. I'm scoring goals, so I cannot learn German." And he was out the next season.
There was also a story that Adolfo's neighbors in Munich called the police because there was a really strange smell coming from his house. And it turned out he had forgotten a chicken in the oven before he went back to Colombia on holiday. True story. They might have had something to do with the contract not being... But he was a good player.
A quick funny story. Like when we signed Drogba to Montreal, the one thing he didn't adapt well as well was the medias. It was like the way the medias are managed in the US is very different as well. So it's a little thing, but they were coming right after the game in the shower, in the locker room, and he was calling us. They were like, "I'm naked. Like they cannot just come and ask me questions and stuff." And so that's a little thing. That's little cultural things that difference. But
yeah, Paddy, for you, on and off the pitch, problems with adjusting, problems with getting to know a new life, a new way of football. You must have come across similar issues with your clients. How have you dealt with them?
Sure. Again, some of them are very obvious. Things like sort of country that your player would go to that speaks the same language is a far easier situation than a player going to a country where he doesn't speak the language, as Matthieu was referring to. So there's certain things. There's countries that are anglicized historically. So places like England, they're not particularly difficult, say, for a player from Australia to go to and adapt to. Whereas probably similar to a Colombian player, an Australian player going to Germany. It would be very difficult for him to adapt to that lifestyle. Fundamentally, as an agent, you're there to support the player in every way, and that includes adapting to a country where you don't speak the language, it's foreign, the style of play is different, just what Jerome was referring to. So you have to support him as best you can, which sometimes is just being on the end of the phone and listening and letting him have somebody to vent to discuss things with. But I think also in the modern day way of football, clubs have a huge role to play in helping players to adapt, no matter what country. I mean, clubs now have been in the business for an awful long time. So they understand, they've had many, many players from many countries. They understand that a player who is happy off the pitch will, part of a high performance environment is how the player feels both on the pitch and off the pitch. Clubs in the modern day, they know that. They know it's very important to integrate a player, that he has to feel good off the pitch. It's all part of building a player's confidence, and ultimately every athlete relies on confidence to perform at their highest level. So the clubs nowadays at certain levels, they do a very good job. The agents, I think, supplement that job. If you're in a relationship anyway with your client, by default you sort of become a mentor, a family member, and so you support them almost like their mother or father would do, which is just to be there, listen. Obviously, if there's any issues that they don't want to address with the club directly, that's our job to address with the club directly. But fundamentally, again, it's part of planning and targeting and saying, well, you know, I know my player's personality. I don't know how he will go in a country where he doesn't speak the language, where he might not eat the food. Is he going to feel homesick? And if that's the case, you don't do the deal just for financial reward, because that will just come back and haunt you. So again, it comes down to planning and research, but in the modern day, clubs are fairly well geared to help players integrate. Whether they actually do integrate comes down to attitude. The player's attitude is a huge part of integrating and adapting to a new league. If the player just doesn't want to do it, or gets there and for whatever reason doesn't like it, it's a very difficult battle to face, because the player has to buy into it fundamentally. But hopefully in the lead up to doing a deal and the lead up to going to a foreign country, he's already thought very clearly about that. Hopefully he's visited the place, he's had a chance to look around, see what it entails, and he will get a feel himself. I always tell players to, you know, consider their gut instinct, and if their instinct tells them this is not right, just don't do it.
Now, a big part of every business and every trade is specifically is proximity and ease of access. You want to do deals that are easy. You want to work with people that, you know, live next door rather than on the other side of the world. How much reluctance do you still feel is in the game when it comes to going to different markets where perhaps clubs feel a little bit unsure what it is they're getting, both on a legal sense with the TPO, people in the background, but also with the culture? Can the player adapt? Or is that changing because of analytics and because of the game becoming a lot more transparent and people are a lot more aware of players in different countries? What's your experience?
Yeah, I think football just changes all the time. It's just very, very quickly accelerating and morphing. The best example I can give, when I arrived in Australia in the early 2000s, they had about 12, 13 players in the Premier League. Today they have 2. That's quite simply because all the football clubs have far greater scouting range. They have better scouts, they have more scouts. The software and data that they have available to them is far greater. So the next great superstar may come from Angola, and football clubs know this. They don't really anymore necessarily pigeonhole certain territories. They know fundamentally that, you know, there's going to always be a production line of great players from South America and from the European clubs. But more and more nowadays, clubs are genuinely looking for a player. In fact, they even like the stories of players that come from unknown markets and can come in and open up a whole new market and create a story and a brand around that player. So, I mean, the rapidly evolving, I suppose, football market just opens the whole world. They're not anymore, I mean, they know fundamentally that South America will always produce good players. They have probably a 150-year head start on a lot of other places. But they know, I mean, Asian markets are emerging very quickly. In Germany, you see quite a few Japanese players over the years now coming in and doing very well. You'll see more of that. You'll see players from other territories in Asia start to permeate other markets. And so as each story happens, it opens another possibility for more Japanese players or a Chinese player or a Korean player. And so that will continue to evolve, in my opinion.
Would you agree with that, Jerome?
Yes, absolutely. I think the clubs right now in Europe are still a bit scared about those markets like MLS. They don't really know what it is, but they see some good stories. They see Almiron, they see Alphonso Davies, they see these guys coming in and doing pretty well. It's going to be more and more because, as I said, we're developing more and more players. The academies are getting better. So I think for the European clubs right now, it's about getting this little new thing, new advantage, I would say, to know this market a little bit better than the others, because this market is going to probably boom very soon. So a lot of clubs are in this kind of strategy. Okay, I'm going to go now. Maybe I'm not going to find players now, but I will know this market. And I know that the other clubs, they're not going that much to watch MLS players. So I'll probably find better players, because now everybody is going to Colombia. I mean, when Matthieu organized a trip in Colombia, you have 35 different clubs. It's crazy. So everybody's going to Argentina. Everybody's going to Uruguay. So MLS, not that many, but more and more. So I think we're getting there.
So you organize big trips for the clubs to look at potential players of yours in Colombia, for example?
Yeah, I do organize that, but mostly in the different tournaments, under 15, under 17, under 20 South American Championships. And now in January there is a pre-Olympic tournament in Colombia and the clubs, even though they have all these video footage, scouts and stuff, they're still very scared to go to unknown territories. And Colombia is still an unknown, maybe violent territory for them. So they always ask me one thing before they go for the first time: do I guarantee their life, and do I guarantee they come back from Colombia? I'm like, yeah, but you'll come back, you'll go back to your home, but you're going to want to come back to Colombia for some reasons. And they always go back to Colombia once they go for the first time. But since they're still very conservative in their scouting, the clubs who are not as conservative as the rest of them, I think they're going to be, they have a big advantage. And then in these kind of clubs, you have two categories. The one who managed to bring, let's say, one Colombian player in, and it doesn't do well, and so they're not going to want to hire any other Colombian for 10 years afterwards. So you really need to choose. It's not only about, it's a long-term relationship with the clubs, well, with your players, of course, with your client, but with the clubs also, because once you bring a player who doesn't fit, who doesn't want to adapt, or whatever the reason is, it closes the door for the next ones, and it closes the door for you. So it's a bit tricky to find the club who's going to risk to take a Colombian profile, let's say, and to deal with the adaptation of your player.
Okay, our time is up. That's fascinating insight. Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you for listening. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.